Okay. Hello, Seth.
Oh, you?
Yep. Likewise, we're here in person. Hello, everyone, and everyone who's joined. Thanks for joining us for this call. Seth and I here. He actually came from Houston, right? Is that where he's based?
Yeah.
Okay. So, we're here to talk a little bit about commercial real estate, is the idea, but we're gonna really dive in and zoom out at the same time, as we're going to talk a little bit about just the usage of space in general, right? So the premise of our talk is definitely to kind of focus a little bit more on the whole spectrum of what are the dynamics in commercial real estate, right? And sort of like what you're seeing with all you're doing with ClarityCastle. So we're going to dive into that for sure. But before we get started, let's maybe do some intros as well. So Seth, feel free to share. Tell me about you.
So only by power. Have you written a booklet?
Okay.
I'll give you the short version. Now, my name is Seth Eslami. I am currently the asset manager for 1225 Notebook Investments. I'm the chief operating officer for Still International Commercial Real Estate. I am the chair for USGBC Gulf Coast Council, and I'm the founder of ClarityCastle, my passion. And what it does is basically creates prefabricated modular workspaces.
Mhm.
But we can get into that.
Yeah.
My background is civil engineer, and I have a crazy nonsense life back, but it all worked out. So
Yeah.
I'm here working hard, trying to, have an impact, make things changes.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the beauty about just real estate in general and the built environment, right? The appeal to it. There's something intangible about this aspect that it's about shaping these physical spaces, these environments, right, that we use and occupy in that sense. And there's something invigorating about that, right? And I think we feel that no matter where in the spectrum we are, at which touch point we are in that aspect of operations, development, and so on. And so, yeah, maybe actually, that's actually interesting. I don't know that your civil engineering background. Um, so if we can maybe just contextualize a little bit, as you shifted from civil engineering into commercial real estate, how did that transition kind of fall through from the standpoint of the, I guess, the operational aspect of like being, I guess, on the engineering team, and then kind of seeing it more on the seller side, right? And the actual relations with the customers and the clients and so on. How was that kind of
Yeah.
transition?
This transition is not as exciting as you would want it to be. Well,
Well, no, the more boring, the better, because that's like the,
well, that's exactly what it is. I was so bored with civil engineering. There was no creativity in it for me, especially when you go to the job. Most people are just doing tasks and they make you go it. There's really not much creativity. I kind of feel bad for a lot of my architect friends. I mean, creative people, and they do the same. They become architect and they're brilliant, and then they end up doing legwork for another architect, which and no creativity. You just see them like this beautiful flower, just like it's dry. Same thing with me. I didn't necessarily choose real estate. Real estate too, but
I feel like that's a similar story for a lot of people actually. In some ways, it's kind of like, yeah, this alignment path somewhat. But yeah, and actually, it's very interesting you bring that up, right? Because we're here kind of to discuss innovation in some regards. And when we think about like this kind of task taker kind of like one way kind of aspect. Now, we must definitely refrain from the fact that it's not universal. Every firm tends to have a culture where like they might be different for sure. But you bring up a very relevant point, which is a conversation that's been had by quite a few now in terms of like the culture consideration, right? And I think even now more so than ever, that culture conversation is becoming ever more important because whether we're looking at talent, recruitment and things like that, about revitalizing sort of what a modern workspace or even workflow, right, as a team looks like.
yeah.
Uh, And so, yeah, that is definitely not something we want to untap so much, but absolutely. Um, yeah. And so, in that principle, we're kind of referring, kind of zooming into that transition. So real estate choosing you, right? And so let's maybe focus and contextualize a bit of why we're even here, right? So at least I'm gonna frame this really a lot from how when we kind of first met, right? And how I learned about what you're doing. And what stuck out quite a bit was this concept of we're constantly redesigning spaces, we're constantly finding what utility we need. Every tenant has their own kind of consideration to that. And you kind of spotted out that, well, there are, serious challenges with this, right? So, like the considerations that every time you have to redo the space, we're going to talk a little bit about the owners of the space themselves and sort of what role they play in accommodating certain things. But when it comes down to just the clients themselves setting up their requirements and sort of what they need, yeah, it's like a huge expense, right? And so this gap that was spotted from the idea that this can be brought into an era of a new efficiency spectrum, right? And so can we talk a little bit about how you view efficiency in real estate in the terms of utility of a space and turnover and things like that?
Yeah. Um, how do I see efficiency? Well, efficiency, I think everything goes back to money. If you want to put it in a business, right? And if you can save money, that means you're saving resources, you're saving time, because they're all connected. So to make it all simple, you could just focus on the money part. Uh, you see it in different assets like energy efficiency. I did the first case project in Texas. We did
Which is a PACE, right?
yes,
Well,
properly assessed clean energy.
Mhm.
It was a very new to take this, and we needed funding for some major projects, and I pick it anyway. Long story short, that's where we did, and we saved a ton of money. We got all these brand new equipment, and it paid for itself and some, right? And in addition, we didn't have to work that hard. Before that half of our time was being spent at getting to work orders and trying to calm people down. And now we're like, wow, we don't have to do this anymore. Everything works. So you save time, you save money. Now you're providing better service. Now you have time to be nice to people. You have to run away from it can actually, sometimes it takes me 15 minutes from my office to the bathroom because everybody wants to talk to me, you know, and I'm fine with it. It's totally fine. That if it's before all that, I would try to just that hide or run in and out. But yeah, efficiency, saving money, saving time, saving resources, right? I feel like we don't necessarily value efficiency unless we really have, right? This is not, it's a choice. When everything is fine, nobody really cares. But when economy goes down, when there's a financial crisis, those landlords goes, okay, yeah, we can save money. Okay, we can't access capital for these projects. What are we going to do? And now going back to what Clary Pepper and my event is, I felt like the most wasteful part of commercial real estate office sector is build outs,
Mhm.
tenant build outs, because 76% of the time when there's a temp change, we have to redo that space. And that's a massive number. It's just doesn't make any sense. And I feel like after COVID, with occupancies dropping and the market getting a lot more competitive, it doesn't make any sense. It's like, so why are you doing this? It's more difficult to get capital, right? Money is more expensive now. There's less potential of making that money. But you have to do it because market is competitive. If you don't do the build out, your neighbor does.
Yep.
But
At least, yeah.
it's a massive waste. We're talking about, in some cases, $50 a foot, right? That's
At the project
a
level.
lot.
Yep.
And to kind of like go a bit deeper, the problem is because the industry has been doing this for a long time, right? When you look at different industries, when you look at the automobile, if you look at a car now and you compare it with a car from 100 years ago, did it even have years ago? You know, 50 years ago, you can't even compare them. Two are totally different, you know, products. But look at after the 50 years ago. What has changed? Some nicer lighting, right? More lighter the items. Besides that, for the most part, dry well, right?
Fix up the space or the programming of the
The,
space.
the,
Yeah.
the way you run it, the same thing. Negotiate a deal. This build out is gonna go in. The next person that comes in, same thing. We're gonna demo it, put it in trash, build a new one. Are they gonna reuse any of the stuff that gets demoed?
We had
No.
And in fact, actually, that was the one thing. So, my background has getting into this has been the sustainability side, and that stayed through, even though over time, I must say, not that I've become more corrupt, but I've started to realize where the fine line between, let's say, environmental considerations are, and then the bottom line of like actually succeeding in end projects, and they can sometimes be very blurry. But when you really start contextualizing things and putting more clarity, you start seeing where the overlap really exists. And then maybe now I'm starting to realize maybe where the name of ClarityCastle came through. But we'll get into that real question to that later. But like and so like on the premise of what you mentioned is that, as like what tenants require is also changing with time, right? So like I mean a big part of the section of this conversation is usage behavior, right? Generally. You mentioned and you brought in COVID. That was like I think one of the biggest reset buttons the industry has seen in a very long time in terms of what really is the utility of a space, why do you need it? And even now we're seeing very interesting demand, kind of like forces in terms of what kind of spaces people need and things like that. And so to that topic, maybe highlight a little bit around if you can share, with the friend that you're working with, how zoning plays a role into this. So you're based in Houston, which is like a very outlier into that spectrum, right?
Yeah.
But I'm wondering how you're seeing some of these regulatory aspects impact the usage behavior dynamic a bit. So what aspects do you prioritize there?
I don't. Houston has no zoning. That hasn't been something that I had too much experience with. So I'm not sure.
Okay.
I can give you a good answer on that. But
All right.
I know on the office itself, the location of the office and the traffic building matters and affect basically because there are different frosts. Yeah. If you're managing a building with tenants are paying $50 a foot to be there, it's gonna be different than a building that people pay $20 a foot to be there.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That that's the one dynamic that I can sure. And that also kind of relates to the location, right? How good of a location. Again, back to COVID. COVID killed it for most of these downtowns. For the longest time, the industry thought that, okay, if you're important, you have to be in downtown. After COVID, like, well, you can be important and you can be working from your couch.
And actually, the location piece, it gets very interesting for that very reason. When we look at urban development in general, you kind of look at like, especially as cities start scaling up, and actually even my recent visit to Houston, it was a POST, which was it was a repurposed venue, right? So it used to be, I believe, a warehouse.
Post
Right?
office.
A post. Okay. All right.
That's
So,
probably the post.
okay.
Yeah.
Right. Yep. And they redesigned it very well, like the wayfinding, and they turned it into an event space. Essentially, is the thing.
It's a mixed use. Yes. Yeah.
Yep. And so, in the context of sort of how location ends up being more so related than to, in that case, they chose that site. I'm not sure if it was the primary criteria, but parking was like one of like the biggest things that I noticed there was like a large like supply of, for example. But when it comes down to sort of, I guess the priority and location ends up tying up so much with the space utilization, right? So like we're talking about office spaces and co-working spaces. Recently, so there's this company called Switchyard.
Yes, yes. I'm
Yep.
familiar with it.
Yep. They opened up in different states and different cities. They actually had an opening event. They did one there too. Okay. And have you been to it? Have you?
Not yet.
Okay.
They didn't buy their pod number. So it's a bummer.
Well, this might be an ask. Well, actually, the one thing I was noticing with that space is that the way they designed it and the way the business model behind it kind of highlights actually what is the shift and sort of how you even look at the whole chain of, let's say, the engagement between the landowner and the building owner and the lease terms, and then as it goes down to the business model of how whoever is leasing and the tenant for how they enable that space even more. Are you by any chance seeing shifts in sort of how there are more direct relations between the business model and the leasing of the space, or like any like aspects to how the space itself?
Dude, yeah, I see the demand is rising. At the same time, I feel like the industry itself is quite defensive. They don't want it, right? Let's you like it. I'm sorry. Whether you like it or not, this is the age of subscription, right? Everything is gonna be based on subscription. And eventually that's gonna take over the office environment too, right? But the industry itself is still fighting it. So you would need third-party companies like co-working spaces, and they're not just co-working office, co-working therapy, co-working architectural,
Mhm.
all these offices, they would have to come sign a traditional lease with the landlord, then provide their subscription-based services, right? There's like our interpretation that the landlord could have done themselves. They could have created those environments and collect those subscription based thing. But industry is so old school, it's just hard to break it.
Let's actually untap that a little bit, right? Just in the sake of the discussion, because resistance usually, and maybe if we look at it psychologically, it's usually maybe stemmed by there's some core fear or some misunderstanding that maybe overlaps that clear decision making. Because it would be unfair to say that a lot of people in real estate aren't sure how to adapt because we've seen it over time. They do at usually at the stage where like the confirmation is just a bit very clear. And I guess in the dynamic of the speed of the market today, which is probably unprecedented to some degree, it's more about that quick validation is actually in the best situation for the early stage kind of adopters and those who actually maybe shaped that market or shaped that sort of shift because they were just more in tune to the market, I guess.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah.
And to be clear, I'm not saying they're all look, but let me go over the psychology behind it, like the reason behind it. M- I mean, the larger landlord entity are REITs. There are these organizations that are massive. They have board of directors. They have guidelines. They have, structures. Which everything has been written down in large books.
Can just call it bureaucracy for now.
There's massive bureaucracy behind it, right? And it has come, those policies, everything has been written based on experience. So you, I wouldn't, even that one day an entire bureaucratic financial system would be like, oh yeah, let's just do this. No, just that's almost
I'm not
impossible.
crypto bros here,
That's
so
boss exactly. And then when you go and you see the VC world, right? You see the investors, they have an impact and they're open minded and they want new things. When they say disruptive, they want disruptive. Allow it, right? Elon Musk, what we did with EV, the perfect example. He knew what he wanted. He had enough force behind it, and he made it happen. An entire auto industry with tons of money. They didn't have any lack of technology or funds or none of that. They just didn't want to make changes. They were happy. They were comfortable. It's working. Why would I make a change? Right? And this same area applied for this work.
But actually, what's interesting, the Tesla story, I don't know all the details, but I do know in the early years, especially with the Roadster and so on, there was an interesting, kind of shift in the company at that point for where there had to be that essence of belief, right? Now, it probably helps if you're Elon Musk a little bit. Like in his case, by then he was already like with PayPal. And so like there's already a momentum around, why you should believe in this ambition. And I think at the end, it goes a little bit to that, right? In real estate, I don't think that that idea of trusting into an ambition ends up being like on a sole collective, because the risk ends up being so much more dispersed to some degree. And so that essence of accountability ends up also at the same time, proportionally ends up being divested. And so what I think is interesting then to tie to this, at the end, real estate is a investment channel. And I think right now, even, right now, as I'm looking into certain collaborations, we're actually exploring this whole theme of how does real estate become seen as an investment and its class for beyond, like, say, for example, how today you have all sorts of ETFs and things in public markets and things like that you can choose, real estate having its own thing. And you mentioned the REIT. So it comes down to this prediction on IRR, right? So what return percentage might you get in a certain year? And even now, I think the whole spectrum of the VC side, what's interesting there is the percentages that people are used to are like completely disconnected from what you see in real estate, and you really start dismissing real estate a little bit, right? And so at that point, it becomes a thing. Well, how do you bring it up to a new standard potentially at that point? And so I feel like that's a lot of what we're all trying to do to some degree is, can real estate end up in this more high velocity and sort of like momentum around how there's more kind of like value circulation?
If I was to differentiate between the VC investment world on the commercial real estate, the VC look at the future, right? They put money in your company and they know, well, they hope that in 5 and 10 years, the value is 100x.
The time horizon,
Right.
but relative to the
Commercial
fund.
real estate,
Yeah.
those funds, retirement funds, REITs, they want profits. They want a return every year. And they don't want the money to sink it. And they're like, well, it's real estate. What is going to happen to the real estate? Nothing. But who's going to come and steal the land? It might lose value, but it's not going to disappear. Well,
Yeah.
in the VC world, that company might disappear. Their CEO might end up in jail and turn out everything was fake. These are that they're conserving. And going back to the Elon Musk thing, yes, he character, but he had to go convince a room of people that were open to new ideas, right? If he was to do this in the commercial real estate world back then, he would have to talk to a room of people who don't want change. They are where they are by experience, by doing the same thing the same way for the past 30, 40, 50 years. That's what they know. Why would be open to something that new? Let someone else do it. Nobody wants to be the first person. Nobody wants to be the frontier or creating a fully, co-working style subscription-based office building. Nope. Nobody's ready for it yet. But once the first person does it, it's gonna kill it. Right? It's gonna be the Elon Musk of commercial real estate.
And just to clarify, because if someone hears this and they'll think, oh, but there's WeWork and there's that. What do you mean the subscription?
WeWork is tool. It's a third party that goes.
So to clarify on it, we're talking about the actual property managers and those in the facilities management aspect of like the full ownership cycle.
Now, another problem with that is, so to me, value is important, right? If I'm the landlord and I rent the space to you directly, that's the best value you're going to get because this is direct. But if I have to lease the space to this third party co-working and then you have to pay a subscription to them,
You have an intermediary, essentially, the margin loss in that
But
sense.
they need to make money too, and they want to grow too. So yeah, we're wasting. It's not efficient, right? Going back to efficiency, that's not the efficient way to do it.
And that's exactly where it brings down to your point on the whole, like, earlier in the market to do it kind of thing. Because we were kind of like sprouted that way, in the sense that it was unheard of to some degree to like operate in
Yeah,
that sense.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a very good example. Um,
And up the study, we were completely. I mean, I watched all the videos, read the books, studied the picture. Yeah, and I, I think it was backwards. I think because it was very new and there were a lot of misdirection.
but actually, let's bring up, you mentioned something about earlier about like, let's say venture-backed companies being a type of asset that could just vanish overnight kind of thing versus real estate being so physical that it's not really like that. And it kind of can be similar to maybe say a given stock, maybe that's like, it has like a meme stock where there's this bubble aspect. So there's this like strong differentiation between the two in that sense. But might be interesting to materialize there a little bit. And maybe we can segue this a little bit into the just like the simple operations of a building and maybe focusing into that. Because at the end of the day, like, let's look at public companies today. When they lay off, because the numbers start equating to a point where the business appears to be more profitable, layoffs equal stock go up, you know? And it's like you start thinking, right, goes back to that efficiency thing. And so, like, in the real estate realm, when we talk about efficiency, the space itself, right, evolves over time beyond, like, it's one thing to think about buildings that are designed from the beginning to consider efficiency. That's a whole different topic, which would deserve its own episode at least, right? Seasons of it. But when we're looking about in like the retrofitting of buildings and things of that nature, that's usually where some efficiency unlock can start happening. So maybe share a bit from your perspective, like those efficiency pathways there, especially with what you founded, right? And this idea ties into it a little bit. But what are some areas there? You mentioned energy, you mentioned just like the fit out process, of course. But like, how are you seeing that conversation around, okay, we know that 30% of our, let's say revenue is accounted for the fact that, our operational cost is this. So OpEx in that paradigm, how do you break it down in today's world in the present time?
Yeah. So we talked about imagery. There's a lot of material and articles and videos and organizations behind efficiency, mainly in the energy sector. And there's still so much room uh, because energy prices are low, right? Especially here in Texas.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, uh, water is the next huge thing. We don't quite understand the value of water. Me living some countries, I've seen it. I've seen what it can do. Can change an entire country, and it's the livelihood. We're starting to understand it, but still, it's so cheap that we don't quite value it properly. We don't manage it. City organizations, when they have money to do a project, they would rather go do something fancy and nice looking rather than fixing their water infrastructure, right? It's very common.
Let's talk about stadiums, right? And sports events. Where's the next FIFA gonna be this time? Yeah, exactly.
But you see what it is. It's definitely undervalued. That's something that I've been working on, trying to understand everything by myself. You can't get trust Google or these pre-written content. I'm actively talking to new companies, startup companies, on what can we do? How should we make this better? And then a lot of these solutions are very expensive, right? And then I'm like, okay, how can you make it cheaper so everybody can afford it? Um, uh, as- and with water landscape, right? I feel like, I mean, I'm in Houston, right? And a lot of Houston commercialized landscape is meant to imitate Chicago or New York or other cities. Dallas. That's a native Houstonian, you know.
So why why
I
why 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 is that though? Because if we think about it, like it's not like these decisions happen in a well, they maybe happen in a vacuum, but they still happen by a set of decision makers that maybe are inspired or I mean, at the end of the day, originality versus
it's because
copying
who sets the
some
standard,
yeah,
right? It's not the landscaping company trying to do that to make me happy, right? People,
their products to look after. So
it's up to somebody who set this standard. The standard they're setting use for my own, right? So, but now I see the trend. More and more companies are like, okay, you know what? We want to use native landscape, so we don't have to keep pouring water on it. It's actually quite costly to water these, not just because of the watering, because Houston's soil is clay, and every time it gets dry, gets hot, cold, those pipes burst, and you have to, you waste a ton of water while the pipe is burst until you figure it out, and then you have to pay somebody to come and fix it. That's what water and time and money goes away.
interesting.
Yeah, and I had a meeting with because I've been looking into that as well, and I found a nonprofit company that is doing this, and my conversation like stay nonprofit, but instead of being a company that is doing this to help people, come and take over, be a business partner. Companies are paying tons of money to commercial landscaping companies to do what you're trying to do, but repetitively putting something else. You just come and replace something that they don't should do. There's money to be made. Make it a business and help people. I feel like a lot of these good ideas get stuck in the nonprofit idea stage, begging people to help them. Well, instead, they should make it a business and say, look, this is what we do, this is how we do it, and this is how much money you save.
But actually, if we think about it, even like from the standpoint of companies having budgets where they have allocations for these kinds of initiatives, I'm not sure what the landscape looks like today in terms of the discovery function, because I'm pretty sure it's obviously a system of inbound and outbound. I'm sure they get more, they receive more than they send out potentially, but that depends probably on the modalities. But actually, in that context, do you see that like? What role does the city play in facilitating that? Because, and I'll share from a personal experience. Sometime last year, here in Austin, the building code department building, so they do a lot of work there to like work with all sorts of like legislation related things and regulatory for all sorts of brick and mortar businesses. And this one meeting was like the way they framed it was that it was a Socratic discussion, kind of like a round table. Everyone was sitting like in an oval and, it's not about, it didn't matter who you were kind of thing, right? It was just about having diversity in the stakeholders and the type of persona, right? And in that case, it was interesting. You had people from the city, you had some developers, and then there were some brick and mortar businesses there. What's interesting with a lot of the brick and mortar businesses is that they're not there because they're experts in real estate. Like they just have a business idea and they want to have a space for it. And they somehow they have to pass this like hurdle really of working to make this happen. And for them, they can feel at a loss sometimes. Like this is obviously where the services business for this booms quite a bit, right? You find the right kind of consultant who can guide you through it. Or if you're working with an interior design firm, they can also guide you in some way. But what was interesting in that discussion was sort of how that facilitation happens. So like, for example, you have a certain space and you need certain accommodations to that space, right? And you start realizing that the nature in the city, for example, or in a given region, or maybe just that building, is that it's all on you as the tenant to figure out what you need to do. This is what the building offers. Good luck, right? And in that case, they try to find, and obviously then becomes an issue of, is there space available? Where do I need to be? Location can matter. And so it gets like complicated. But point being is that the role of facilitation to like connecting those dots. And so like, are you seeing that, is there enough being done or are there mechanisms that you've seen that actually help sustain that facilitation in a better way?
Yeah, I agree with you, but Being to what you were saying, the city role, I'm also very active in Houston, Beaumont, right? I'm in the legislative committee. And I'll tell you, any organization, the moment the city or, the regulatory comes and says, okay, from now on, you should do this, they're all going to pull out their swords. Nobody wants that. Everybody would fight it.
And just to be sure, for anyone listening, we're not talking about literal swords here.
Yeah.
Um, Texas may have its wildness, but I don't think we pack swords.
But yeah, they're not going to fall for it. They don't want any new rules or anything that would force anybody to spend more money and
Sure.
right. That it's how simple as that. Uh, and I'm sure she'll say in every city, every part of her country, or even the world, nobody wants to be told what to do. Right. That's why, for me, the best way to do it is make it a business. Show people how they can save money, how it's going to benefit them. And the environmental side and aspect of it is a plus, right? I care about that. You care about that, right? But that's not something that we create. That does not be facing big deliberate change. You know, look at recycling, right? Everybody has to do recycling. All the commercial outputs have to do recycling.
Yeah.
Everybody pays for it. Everybody pays for the recyclable material to get picked. But are they being recycled? No, because the industry hasn't figured out how to make it profitable. A few years ago, when China stopped buying our recycled material, we're not doing it anymore. We're just putting them in landfill.
Actually, that was actually quite amazing to think about, right? Back then, it was like a godsend kind of thing, because it was like, we don't know what to do with this waste. Wait, you're gonna just buy it from us? Like,
Yeah.
and it was like this quick escape button. It was kind of like, just like, okay, and then it only accumulated over time. And we'll talk a little bit about the recycling aspect of things, because what I found interesting, and why I kind of, like, let's say, qualified what you're working on, is that you put emphasis on that, like the materials you choose and how things are made. And we can talk a little bit about, like, the beast that is the manufacturing in China, because I feel like they've definitely done a lot in terms of, like, how they're there to serve you, basically, right? They're just like, they have everything you kind of want, and then you just, like, if you have the money for it.
Business. They understand business. If there's money in your pocket, they want it.
I mean,
They'll find a way to do it. It's very interesting.
have you ever been to one of these massage parlors where they're like, I always get, like, invaded by, like, you have to leave a tip of a certain amount, and, like, there's, like, this, like, kind of like, this is kind of like, this is ruining the vibe. We just, like, yeah. But yeah, no objections to that. Like, all respect to the business in that sense. But um, well, actually, let's talk about that briefly. So, in that sense, the fabrics that you use. So, for one, what I like is that you actually have a catalog where people can actually choose the colors they want inside,
Yes.
right? And so, talk a little bit about how that journey went to kind of setting that requirement. So, like, scouting the manufacturing plant, I guess, or the right partners. How did that journey kind of go? And share as much as you feel comfortable, of course.
So obviously, when I started this, my vision was to create a new co-working space myself, right? In a nice open space. One of my personal core values is empathy, right? And empathy doesn't mean just like feeling bad for people. Me trying to understand you as a customer, as a client, as a partner. What is your pain? What do you want differently, right? And I could see as people come to the office, but they're not as happy as when they go to the gym, as they go to Costco, they go to mall, right?
Trader Joe's.
They're open. These places are open. When you walk in, you feel like you're a part of a larger space. But when you go to Apple, door, window, right? It's not the same environment. It's a completely now it's a very nice outlet, lots of very expensive furniture. but they're happier in that sample or target, right? The psychology behind it had done it. So I wanted to create kind of like the same uh, style of co-working space, but in a very large open space. As I was working, it's like, okay, and I'm going to use these pods. They're soundproof, they're modular, they're beautiful, you know, and we should later on talk about quality of noise pollution, the huge impact on people, especially now, and this, the, as I was going on, I started getting price on these. I was like, these are expensive. No wonder you don't see them, right? Because they're very pricey. Who's going to afford them? And as I was working, I was like, that's the business. That should be my challenge to get people to stop building and buy instead. Instead of building something that is going to end up in trash, to buy something. But my real challenge is going to be two things. One, they need to be at the same price range.
Mhm.
You know, if you're not, if you're between Toyota and Honda, like, okay, which one is better? But if you between Toyota and a Mercedes, you look in your pocket, right? Which one can I afford? Then which one do I like, right? So that was my challenge. So I tried to see if I can make them here. I was like, okay, no way, no way. I would. The demand has to be there, right? There has to be massive demand before we can build them here at a reasonable cost.
Yeah.
But if I'm gonna, I asked that if most companies won't even reply to me. Like, oh, just build you one, whatever you feel like it. No, a minimum order of this
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, they have to ramp up their. I'm sure there is some breaking points.
business. Doesn't make sense to them. They need to make money too.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely looking in China. I went there. I probably toured so far. Toured probably about 30 different factories. How they beat things. Who are they? Because they can get all sort of different people there. So I'm very picky on that.
Are you prospecting? Are you still prospecting the manufacturing of it to happen here
Yeah.
if the avenue of it opens up? It's been interesting. I mean, these things don't build overnight, but what I'm seeing more and more of, there's some companies here where the concept of a micro factory is becoming a thing. And the idea behind it is that basically a lot of the raw materials end up being shipped to these factories where there is the tooling and the machinery to develop whatever it is they're trying to do. Some of the companies I've seen are applying it to housing, obviously. And so in this case, and even the material usage at this point ends up being to where there's a new level of efficiency achieved from the standpoint that you set new constraints. Because at the end, constraints are helpful. As much as someone thinks that constraints might be limiting, it's in fact sometimes great. Setting the right ones, that is. Because that's when we really spark up our creativity and really find out like how we can maximize something. And so I found that that's back to the point of how architects are kind of being like, de-emphasized slightly. It's like, well, the value add from them is exactly that, right? And they can reconfigure some things in ways you maybe never thought about, right?
Yeah.
And so it gets interesting there for sure. Um, but
So let me go back to that, right? So I don't work with one factory, I don't buy and resell, right? I have my own input. I resource different products, from different factories. And like the end part is being done in US, right? So these are assembled in the United States. But one thing they realized was I wanted everything to be built from recycled material, right? So that was one of my questions. And everybody started like, no, no, no. But as I learned the culture, I realized that in China, if you say I used recycled material, it's bad.
bad how?
It's bad. It's frowned upon. That means you're cheap. That means you're not using the best of the best. So in reality, they're using recycled products for everything. They just don't want to admit it. Here it would be a plus over there. If
I see what you
yeah,
mean. No, it's an inferiority of some kind.
yeah.
Okay. All right.
So
Hmm.
the challenge became finding partners that are certified for using it. And that was quite some time, but I did. So
What does certification in that look like? What do you like? Is this like a plaque that sits on their
yep,
front door kind of thing? Okay, is it?
yep,
Okay.
once a year. There are different level for the PT panels. That's what I do now.
And is that regulated by the Chinese
No,
and
the
the global? Okay.
and nobody really trusts
I'm wondering here.
all the real
They have their own check boxes, automatic
these are
icons.
European companies that
Sure.
provide these services. So
Yes.
my vision is a true circular card, right? Because once I'm big enough, I'm hungry enough to man, we throw steel here, we throw away aluminum, glass, and plastic. I can use all four of those to build an office. I'll be able to be the first company that I will take your trash and resolve it into a nice, beautiful office that would last 30 years, you know. And then after that, it can get recycled again. That's what we're for. That's not, you know.
And let's not forget the framing that is. This is also beyond office spaces, right?
Mostly.
When we were was the other time we were having lunch and you were sharing like you're checking out some coffee shops
Yes.
that have like and some of them here in Austin actually I've been quite amazed. There are quite a few where because of the lot allows for it, they will make sure that, and some of the breweries too, have indoor and outdoor. And a lot of these outdoor spaces tend to be very spacious in terms of how they're laid out. And obviously, all the remote work now is like everyone's camping at a coffee shop. And yeah,
No, but and then that's an interesting thing because so I try to keep my job and my company separate, right? I never
overlap them.
overlap.
Sure.
So when I worked on my company was at night on weekends. I was in different coffee shop with my laptop. And one of the things I realized was that even though I'm here in this room with all these people and conversation, I'm comfortable. I like working here. In my office, I have a massive office. But if I hear somebody talk to someone else over there, I get distracted. Coffee shop, I'm nuts. But on the downside, every time I have a phone call, every time I have a Zoom meeting, I don't feel comfortable doing it here. So I have to step out and sit in my car.
Interesting.
Right. Now, that's when I realized, man, they need to have these in every single coffee shop.
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, I start talking to different coffee shops. In fact, I came to Oxford and I talked to 30 different coffee shops. But the baristas, like, what do you think?
And just to be sure, you didn't drink 30 coffee cups that day. And so
It wasn't in one day, to be fair. It wasn't fair enough. Okay. Yeah, but I had solo. There you go. Do you have espresso? Oh, with Paco.
Italian style there. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, Austin espresso scene is actually pretty good too. There's some like really good coffee. But I don't. Yeah, they said, yeah, we have people working here all the time. There were some of them that were like, no, we don't want people to work from here. And after I start, we realized like they're not utilizing they're not monetizing your space. Somebody comes here, sits down, gets a cup of coffee, and works for 4 hours. This is prime real estate. It's definitely worth more than $7 for 4 hours.
And actually, at that point, that actually brings in the gap. I mean, at the end of the day, depending on one's situation and circumstances, maybe they do have a budget allocated for this kind of thing. Like I remember a lot of the companies that have a hybrid work policy or remote work policy, they've started allocating budgets for you have X amount of dollars to go find yourself a co-working space or something like that. And now I believe most of the time it's kind of optional too in terms of how they prefer to use that, but it's usually allocated for that, right?
Right.
And when we think maybe about like let's say a coffee shop person kind of thinking that well then maybe they're trying to save some money, right? They go there and they're like, well, I'm just getting my coffee. Even then maybe they're just getting one, right? But the idea is that it's not that they're not willing to spend more. It's just that there might be this missing in between, right? Because I mean, at every market, there's always going to be segmentation at so many levels. And I feel like for this, the segmentations are actually far higher than we realize. But because, I mean, unfortunately, it's not like software where you can just like deploy a physical thing and like, let's test this out. So like the whole segmentation thing happens a lot more scarcely and more segmented in larger frameworks. And so one has to kind of like find their way in depending on where it is. But solutions like this create that fragmentation to happen in the right segmentation
Right.
pieces. And so, yeah,
So from that, to your point, I figured I can make pod or coffee cup where I can manage the access, right? So a lot of coffee shops are basically running, month to month. They don't have a big budget for innovation. So if I have the right product, I can come and say, no, I'll just put this pod right here and people pay and use it and you get a cut. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to buy it. Just at the end of the day, clean it up. If there's trash, just take it away.
they don't have to remember your name and write.
Vending machine, right? A words vending machine that you can have in all different kind of public places. And you know, I haven't done it yet, but from my research, a lot of people, a lot of VIP people who want to show off if they can afford it, they're like, yeah, if this was there at any coffee shop, that's the only place I would take my coffee. Like,
Mhm.
show that, yeah, I don't mind paying $10 an hour, you know.
Sure. Well, I mean, at that point, I think that goes into a whole different segment of like market behavior in general. Because like even if we, there was a, can remember Soho House, for example. So like if we think about some of these social clubs, and I think this ties a little bit more, and we're kind of reaching the end here. So
Sure,
I mean,
yeah,
just for the maybe we can leave this conclusion kind of to where the reality of like the market demand for space today goes a little bit beyond just like co-working in that sense, and it's also about third spaces.
yeah,
And so it kind of becomes a thing where it's not just about the amenities that that space provides, but the community that might be available to a given person or group within that environment. And I feel like that's really where we are putting or should be putting our efforts really is in that aspect of how does the community building component tie into that space to where we can have that better interconnectivity? Because I feel like social clubs have gotten their good demand from that special kind of scenario to where yeah, you can work here if you need to, because obviously, everyone's busy, but then there's that social component as well. And so that social fabric ties into it quite a bit. Coffee shops play a perfect role into that, right? 100%.
yeah. There's a whole, the whole coffee shop vibe. It's a silver culture, whatever we want to that. And this is what we're known for. Like the most American thing you can see in a different country is Starbucks.
Right. Which is often actually, and to that point, and I think this maybe refines it a little bit with the pods that you're doing is consistency. So Starbucks, a big reason. I remember not last year, the year before that, we were in Europe, and I was traveling with someone who loves their coffee, and the way coffees are known here are not common in other parts of the world. For example, wanting a tall cup, right? Or like something, where like you get the higher amount. And what's actually kind of funny is that in Italy, there is a whole brand around the coffee shop called 12 fluid ounces. It was literally like everything there is measured in milliliters, right? And there was the shop's literally called 12 fluid ounces because you get your 12 fluid ounces, right? And it was like it kind of speaks to that consistency piece, though, to knowing what to expect. And I feel like with when you have this kind of infrastructure of being able to deploy spaces that have a certain accommodation, you're able to be consistent with knowing, okay, this is what you're gonna expect, and you know where you're gonna go. And so, yeah,
And before
um,
we end, let me,
sure, no, yeah,
we talked about the vision, right? Right at the beginning. The way is the TI and this renovation industry in commercial real estate work,
PI meaning
tenant improvements, right?
okay,
Yeah, it's such a normal thing to me.
no, it's
Yeah.
okay, but yeah,
Every year, 10 to 12 million tons of drywall is ended up in landfill. That's just in the US.
yeah,
So we're not talking about, $100,000 to the clouds. We're talking about $100 billion a year industry. This
yeah,
is how big the waste is. This is what I'm trying to kind of like jump in. It's kind of like a waterfall, Niagara Fall, and I'm trying to get in and put my hands. I'm gonna save some of this water. But this is how much to waste it.
You know, no, it's I think there's a lot of excitement to the circular economy development. And we know I think we can agree to it, both of us here. I mean, we're both relatively young, maybe a little slightly younger, but in both ways, because of how the time spectrum to this, the best we can do as a collective today is what foundations can we start building for the future in that sense? Because it's all systematic. And it's very clear also, fortunately, that if you really ask younger generations today, there is more empathy around this.
Definitely.
And there's definitely more like solidified kind of like perspectives around, like, we're not here to ruin things. And like, so like there's a lot of that will reinforce the things that we build today to kind of support that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so that can be pretty exciting too. So yeah.
One of my main advisors through this whole thing, my son, he and my teenage son, they go because I want to see what they think, what they see. This is the world that we're living for them. You know, so I care about what they.
Who negotiated harder here about what their role was for being a board member or advisor?
He is not.
Is this a volunteer experience?
Not why they're not interested. So you have to like get their attention. What do you?
Well,
What?
Well, maybe Elon Musk's point on like money won't matter might have a point somehow, and that there might be a different system to, yeah. Are we gonna be like AI? We're all needing tokens, and we exchange things through tokens, but yeah, a whole different discussion there. We were just talking about fear of changing, right, for business models, and then your currency just changed. So yeah. Well, Seth, this was a pleasure. And yeah,
But
no, yeah, well, I did too. And, I find all of this very interesting. So these discussions are always helpful, and as we share ideas and stuff. So, and even for the audience, as you tune in, or maybe you check the recordings for some of this, definitely, yeah, uh, we'll see. This space here is a test run, so I'm not sure next sessions will be here as well or not, but happy to know or you get feedback on kind of like how this was done in a physical space. But yeah, wishing the best and cheers to what's ahead and
appreciate that.
everything in the built environment. Yeah.
Good to see you.
To see you guys.
Bye.
Bye.